all the things we need to be most disciplined about, ambition is one of them, because it tells you this lie that after I become a New York Times bestseller, after I make $1 million, after I get a gold medal, then I'll be good. My parents will be proud of me. I'll be happy. Then I can relax. And you have to have the perspective, the wisdom to go, was that ever been true ever in my life before? Has that ever been true in history?
Yeah.
And then go, oh, okay, no, I can't tell myself that lie. That doesn't mean you don't work really hard to do stuff, but you're not doing it under the false pretenses that it's going to be conditional to your happiness. Yeah. And also, it's realizing that you have multiple things that you're trying to do simultaneously. So, yeah, sure, continuing to work 18-hour days may help you continue to advance in your career. But if one of the other things you're trying to work on is to stay married, or to better yet, have a happy marriage, or you have children, or you have your health, or whatever. Like you were telling me before we recorded that you got in at 3 a.m. last night. Let's say you're a person who always wakes up very early. Like I'm a person who wakes up early.
Yeah, same.
But then I also have to understand that sleep is a discipline. And so if some changes outside my control mean that I didn't go to bed to a certain time, the fact that I wake up at 5, that's a bad idea. And it actually requires, you wouldn't think that sleep discipline would be a thing, but in the military, they talk about that. Sleep discipline, you got to get your hours because you make bad decisions when you're not rested. And other people bear the consequences of those decisions. And so deciding, hey, I'm going to skip this thing that feels comfortable to me to do, that feels natural for me to do, that I feel like I'm letting some part of myself down by not doing. I actually have to be the bigger, more self-controlled person and say, in this moment, I'm not going to do that, right? And I think at the end of the day, self-discipline is the ability to have an emotion, an instinct, a feeling to do a thing, and then to catch yourself and go, is that actually the right thing to do, yes or no? And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's, hey, it's cold outside and it's 5 a.m. and it's still dark and I don't want to get up. But I have to get up because I've made these commitments, I'm behind, blah, blah, blah. And other times it is to stay in bed, right? Just like, sometimes you feel that surge of temper coming on and you have to go, no, that's not a good, it's always the ability to step back, put the emotion, the instinct, the opinion to the test. And one of his translators says, he never even says the word stoicism in his writings, but he's considered this philosopher emperor, and he probably still would have been even if his writings had never survived, because the deeds are there. There's a Latin expression, acta non verba, deeds, not words. And so you have to always think, not what do I write about, what do I think about, what do I want to be true, but what do the actions show? And no one is perfect, and I think anyone auditing themselves there's going to be some disappointments, but you want the big statements of priority to be there. And to go back to the idea of guilt, when you're looking at it, you shouldn't whip yourself and feel, but you should be okay, this is not painting the picture that I want to paint. And that you're lucky enough in that moment to catch it now, not when you're 80, not on your deathbed. You've caught it now. And so what changes are you going to make to get closer between the ideal and the reality?
Is that pretty much everything we do every day can be defined by thinking, feeling, and doing. But I think we're living at a time where we're stuck in the feeling generation. So we do things because we want to feel a certain way, but then when we feel things, we don't know what to do with it. So I'll give an example of what I mean by that. If we feel guilt, most of us don't know how to shift from that feeling into thinking and doing something different in order to not feel that guilt again.
Yes.
And if we want to feel happy, we just try and feel happy, not realizing that you have to change your thoughts and what you do in order to feel happiness or whatever it may be. What I'm trying to get at there is that to me sounds like a discipline too, but we've gone so into feeling because I think for so long, thinking and doing were the only things talked about, and we didn't feel enough.
I think realizing that almost all the things you want in life are accidental byproducts of habits, processes, systems, routines, right? So Viktor Frankl famously said that happiness can't be pursued, it must ensue. It's the result of getting those big things right, and then you just feel this kind of feeling of happiness as a byproduct. You don't, as you said, you don't go, today I must feel happy, right? It's the result of having meaning and purpose and taking the right actions. And so people sometimes look at the books that I've written and they're like, how did you publish so many books? And it's like, publishing is not what I think about. I think about writing. I wake up every day and write, and the accidental byproduct of that is the publishing, right? And so good habits, good routines, like if you want a happier home life, it's like, are you spending more time there? Are you how are you setting up systems or processes that the result is that outcome, right? You control what you put in, the outcome happens or it doesn't happen. And I think so often we just, you're right, we just want the feeling, so we try to cheat it or steal it, or we feel guilty that we don't have it, when really you could start small right now. We will take, and Seneca points this out in one of his letters, like we'll push ourselves, we'll take risks to succeed financially, to succeed in business, to succeed in our careers, to buttress our reputations. But then we don't want to do it in the other places where most of us would admit it actually matters, right? My favorite passages in Meditations, Marcus Aurelius is like, a better wrestler, but not a better forgiver of faults, a better friend in tight places. He's pointing out how we'll go like, yeah, I'm trying to, like, you'll talk to someone that have this well laid out plan for how they're trying to increase their back squat or their mile time, or how they're trying to they've got these aggressive goals for their stock price, or how many copies they want to sell of this thing, or we have really clear financial and professional goals. And then in our personal life, we just wing it. Yeah, and I'm not saying that
I didn't mean that, but I know what you mean. I love that point.
And I think the point is, like, you have to be challenging yourself in your personal life, also getting vulnerable, getting outside your comfort zone, having the conversations that you like. I think it's because our professional stuff is so much more quantifiable. And then there's other people are looking at it, whereas the other stuff is private. And so we hold ourselves to different standards, and you think about what that costs us in terms of a place you get to in your marriage in 10 years that had you thought more consciously about, or put 1/10 of the focus on, maybe you could have got there in 1 year and then had 9 years of enjoying it.
I think discipline often gets applied to the titan in the industry, not the amateur at home.
Yeah.
And that's how we think about discipline. We think about discipline as, what can I achieve through this?
Yeah.
In an external sense. Yeah, and at least today, that's the language.
And you can get away with so much more. If you're really talented, you can be a jerk, right? You can demand a lot of people because you're paying these people, right? Like, I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying that there's accommodations that are made for you. And sort of insidiously, the more successful you are, the more needed you are, the more accommodations you are. But there's none of that in the other area. And so there's some humility required, right? You're meeting equals on an equal playing field, and the discipline to say, like, yeah, I'm gonna wrestle with that. I'm gonna try to get better. I'm not gonna allow myself to do these following bad habits. That takes a certain amount of self-control and focus and discipline. And you go, I have to do this right now. What do I have to do today? What are the small steps? And you get great by minor improvements compounded on top of each other day in and day out, showing up day in and day out. And that's the same, hey, we were fighting like crazy 6 months ago, and now things are awesome. Why is that? They made a change, and you made a change, and you made a response, and a change in response to their change, and it compounded, and now you're here. That work can fall away at any moment. You have to rebuild it. But I think, the Buddhists talk about willful will. Like, almost the more intentional you are about it, that's the irony too, is we're talking about how, being intentional in your professional life often pays off. Being intentional, having clear expectations, wants, desires in your personal life is harder because it depends on other people. People who are not like you, people who did not sign up for that. And I think one of the things you learn having kids and then also being married is that, like, assent in that same sense of, like, acquiescing to things, adjusting to things. Like, I'm a routine person. kids don't care about your routine. They fall asleep when they fell asleep.
Yeah.
And you have to adjust. Like, you're no longer the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And that is such an important thing that you have to figure out and adjust and accommodate towards. You're the master of the universe here, but that you leave that behind when you walk through the front door. How do I know I'm making progress? And my philosophy says, I've begun to become a better friend to myself. So discipline is not just squeezing blood from the stone. It's not just whipping yourself. It's hiring a coach. It's setting reachable goals as you go. It's stepping back and giving yourself credit and saying, look how far we've come, man. Like, we're doing great, right? It's not just this sort of like in your face, like, how are you not there yetness, right? It's a journey, and you're not supposed to really ever get there. That it's like the horizon. It's always a little bit further away. And so, I think when we hear discipline, I think we think of like the Marine drill sergeant.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of transformative, didn't have discipline and now you do. We should also think about it that like having a discipline, it is a thing you do your whole life, and realizing that that's how we should measure this progress. It's like the way our mind works, whatever is happening now, you will look back on sometime in the future as formative to who you become, right? And yet in this moment, all we're doing is trying to make it something other than it is, right? Like, we will look back on COVID and see the good in it, the lessons that came from it, the reminders it gave us, the weird experiences we had, the connections, all of that. We'll look at that. But in that moment, all we're thinking about is when this will be over, whose fault it is, what it's cost us, right? Freud says in retrospect, the struggle will strike you as most beautiful. But it's such a shame, so unnecessary to deprive yourself of understanding the beauty of it now. Certainly perspective adds to it. It allows you to see it differently. But what if you could just not feel guilty, worried, anxious, resentful? Like, in the future, this will be a story, right? You'll have learned, but you could give yourself the gift of at least some of that now by accepting it and just seeing it as what it is in front of you, that it's practice. Obviously, saving is coming from a good place. The other thing we do is we tell, it's so bad that happened to you. I'm so sorry. You're this victim, right? Like the first year of COVID, they would describe for kids that this was like a lost year. And I just remember thinking like how
that language,
patronizing, but also self-fulfilling that was for kids. Like when I would talk to my grandparents or old people that lived through the Depression or the Second World War, which were, by the way, a lot longer than COVID, they weren't like, oh, it was a lost time. It was a transformative, formative experience that in retrospect made them who they were, that maybe even if you'd asked them if they would have wanted things to be different, they would have said no. And we have the power to transform whatever we're going through into that thing. So yeah, by rescuing someone, you're depriving them of that thing, but also by telling them that there's nothing in this thing, that it's indisputably, inarguably bad, is to deprive them of the agency, the perspective, the gift that they have in front of them if they choose to see it that way. And we should emerge from this period, at the very least, as you said, like if you haven't been through stuff like this before, you just lived through an event of historic proportions. Like you just lived through an event that your kids and your grandchildren, future generations will marvel at. And you emerged unscathed, maybe even improved in some ways. Like you should emerge from this with a real sense of what you're capable of enduring and surviving and adjusting towards. And that should give you a lot of confidence as you wake up and you experience things that are so microscopic compared to that thing.
Yeah.
Right? And you should feel armed with a certain set of weapons or tools that maybe you didn't have before. Like you've been knocked around and you didn't get knocked down. That's powerful. Well, you're setting yourself up for disappointment or frustration or resentment or despair by attaching to an outcome that's not yours. If you get lucky, sure, you'll feel wonderful. But if you work for years on a book and success or failure of it was, did it win awards? Did it sell lots of copies? Did your parents read it? You know, those are things that are not in your control. But if it was, I understand this better than when I started, I am more confident than I was when I started, you know, like I said something, I got on the page what I thought only in my head at the beginning, right? Like when you move the outcome or the goal to something that's up to you, you'll always win. And I think that's what wise people do. It's not that they're not ambitious. They are ambitious, but their ambition is things that are up to them. And so when Marcus is saying better wrestler as opposed to better philosopher, better friend, whatever, he's shifting from like this external societal driven thing to this internal thing that he controls, that he gets to judge the success or failure on. And it's not so quantifiable either. It's something deeper, more human, more connected. And so as you shift that, not only do I actually think you do better work, but you are increasing your chances of feeling good about yourself at the end of that. I always think about, like, again, what is success? At the end of the day, like, if your thing sold 0 copies, but it changed the world, you'd be like, that was a win.
Totally.
So why don't you just do the stuff that changes the world and trust the process that you'll probably be able to make a living.
Absolutely.